Hey, welcome back to Crime Time 911. Back in the 1980s, if you were a member of the LGBTQ community, you likely kept it a secret. There was a heavy stigma surrounding this community, and this forced a lot of people to live a secret or even second lives. This stigma also made it unsafe for those who were outed. Even though there was still some ignorant people who have hatred towards the LGBTQ community, it is a little bit more acceptable today compared to 35 plus years ago. This leads us to today's case that was thought to be a potential hate crime against a gay man. This is the case of a teacher, brother, son, and friend who was a 36-year-old man from PEI who was just trying to have a fun night out on the town, but it ended up costing him his life. This case was requested by my friend Megan. I hadn't even heard of this case beforehand, and it was a bit of a challenge trying to gather information. Please keep in mind that all the information shared in this episode is based on public information that is already available. Now let's get into it. Byron Carr had been known as a caring English teacher who taught at Montague Regional High School. He also loved to hold dinner parties and enjoyed rock and roll music. Even though Byron was well known around Charlottetown, PEI, not many knew he was gay. It was a secret that would only be revealed by tragic circumstances. So back in the 80s, the stigma around being a part of LGBTQ community kept a lot of people quiet about their true relationship preferences. This is likely why Byron kept his identity a secret. On November 10th, 1988, Byron is out to dinner with a friend at a restaurant in Charlottetown. After this, he heads home and has a couple of friends over for coffee. The friends would reveal that Byron had received a few phone calls while they were there. They had left his house at approximately 11:45 p.m. Byron heads out to 3 local bars, Pat's Rose and Gray, Bud's Bar, and then Gentleman Jim's in Charlottetown. At about 2 a.m., Byron would leave Gentleman Jim's and head home with 2 of his friends. 45 minutes later, the friends would leave. At about 3 a.m., Byron leaves his home again and picks up a male friend who is walking at the corner of University and Euston. He drops his friend off at a boarding house on Sydney Street. About 5 minutes after Byron drops his friend off at the boarding house, a witness sees him talking to a man on a bicycle at Price and Richmond Streets. Byron then drives off in the location of his house, and the man on the bike appears to follow him. Byron had had a boarder at this time, and when this person got home at approximately 9 a.m. on November 11th, he noticed that Byron's bedroom door was closed. Even though the boarder also saw Byron's car in the driveway, he did not see Byron in person. But he didn't think much of it, and he would leave the house again to go out of town for the long weekend. So for those of you that aren't aware, in the Maritimes, November 11th is treated like any other stat holiday, and outside of emergency services, most people do get the day off, like you would, on any other occasion in Ontario or anything like that. A friend of Byron calls him, but there was no answer. At about 3:30 p.m., another friend drove by the house and saw the car in the driveway. Later that evening at about 8 p.m., another friend stops by Byron's and knocks on the door, but there's no answer. At 8:45 p.m., witnesses would report that they saw 2 males acting suspicious near Byron's home. On November 12th at 2:30 a.m., witnesses in the area reported hearing Byron's dog barking, which was unusual, as well as a vehicle leaving the area at a high rate of speed. On November 12th, Byron was supposed to attend a family function. At 11 a.m., when he hadn't shown up, relatives decided to go to his house. When they arrived, they found the kitchen door was open and Byron's dog was locked in its kennel. The relatives found Byron's lifeless body laying on his bedroom floor. He had been strangled and a sharp object was used on him. On the wall, in pen, the perpetrator wrote, quote, "I will unalive again." Only they used the real word that starts with a K. Due to what they found at the scene, police suspected that Byron had been unalived after he had a consensual intimate act with the same gender partner, as they had found underwear that did not belong to Byron. It's also thought that the message on the wall might have been written when witnesses heard Byron's dog barking. A couple of months after Byron's unaliving, there had been a similar attack on another gay man. This victim had met a young man in downtown Charlottetown and ended up bringing the man home. Allegedly, after the men had a consensual intimate act, The young man became aggressive and grabbed a sharp object and threatened the man who brought him home. He would state that he had done this before. This victim was put under hypnosis to help come up with a sketch of the suspect. Police were unsure if the sketch was the same man who had unalived Byron, despite the similarities in both crimes. This case would go cold and stay that way for nearly 2 decades. It's thought that because this was potentially a crime fueled by hate towards the gay community and the stigma around the community could have been another factor in why the investigation hadn't gained any traction back then. So it's really sad that this case was basically put on the back burner, potentially because Byron's secret of being gay. I know back in the 80s, coming out wasn't something that many did, and a lot of the LGBTQ community lived their lives in secret, but it is just disgusting how people were treated like they didn't even deserve the same treatment as regular, quote, normal people. The first few days in an investigation into crimes such as this are very important. Police need to speak with witnesses as well as gather as much information as possible about the victim and the people close to them. However, in this case, no one would talk. People may have feared that they would be the next target if they spoke with police. Deputy Chief Brad McConnell would reopen the case in 2007. He spoke with hundreds of witnesses and uncovered new leads as well as new evidence. The person who saw Byron speaking to the man on the bicycle came forward in 2008, 20 years later. Of course, the police were skeptical, but when the man passed a polygraph, they knew he was credible. This is when police believed that the man on the bike was likely their suspect. The police had identified an accomplice, however, he had passed 15 years beforehand. After this man's death, 2 witnesses had come forward, one in 2008 and the other in 2012. They told police that the accomplice had confessed to his role in helping the perpetrator, but he hadn't told them the name of the actual suspect. Socks had been found in the garbage at Byron's house. Police thought that they had been worn on either the suspect or the accomplice's hands as gloves. However, DNA testing would later reveal that the DNA left on the socks did not match either the suspect or the accomplice. Police collected hundreds of DNA samples from those closest to Byron at the time. They also released pictures of the underwear believed to have belonged to the suspect. In the picture, you can see that there is a section on the front of the underwear that had been cut out. This part had DNA on it that belonged to both Byron and the suspect, as well as a woman. So I'm guessing that the suspect must have engaged in an intimate act with a female at some point while either wearing that underwear or put that underwear back on afterward. Because we know that Byron wasn't into females, so this other man must have, at least been bisexual or maybe fooling himself. I don't know, but it had to have come from the other man because I don't believe that a woman was involved in this case. In the spring of 2022, the police began working with Wyndham Forensics Group and Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy to apply advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy to the case. Ultimately, the results of these tests would lead to their suspect. On January 25, 2024, 35 years after the unaliving of Byron Carr, police arrested Todd Joseph Gallant, who was 56 at the time of his arrest. He was charged with first degree. Gallant would have only been 21 at the time he committed the horrific act on Byron. A second individual was also arrested, but would later be released due to lack of evidence. In December of 2024, Gallant's lawyer, Chris Montigny, had stated that he intended to challenge the admissibility of the DNA evidence that police were using as the key to laying the first-degree charges in the unaliving of Byron. Montigny told CBC News that, quote, "We're going to bring an application to exclude some evidence, and that's connected to the DNA." The lawyer also stated that, quote, "The evidentiary motion is really just to see if the search and seizure was lawful or not. Parties have agreed that it makes sense to do this first as opposed to waiting closer to the trial date." At the time Montigny was filing for the evidentiary motion, Gallant had already decided to have his case tried before a jury, which means if the DNA is thrown out, it will not be presented to the jurors who will ultimately determine the fate of Gallant. Apparently, this motion comes down to how Gallant's DNA was obtained when he returned to PEI in 2023. However, no details on how the DNA was obtained has been shared. So I feel like the defense lawyers are always going to try and find a loophole to get their client off the hook, or at least have the charges reduced to something like second degree or manslaughter. It's actually quite difficult to have someone go through a trial and actually be charged with first degree. So I feel like Gallant might actually end up getting second, but who knows? This case is still ongoing and still has yet to go to trial. So starting on October 8, 2025, the arguments on whether or not the DNA evidence can be produced will be made in front of the judge alone. Gallant has been in jail for 1.5 years and will remain there until his next scheduled court date appearance in October. So after 35 years, I really hope that they are able to get a conviction. I couldn't imagine what the Carr family had been going through all this time, not knowing who was responsible for taking the life of their loved one. But if Gallant ends up getting away with this horrific crime, I feel like that would be a punch in the face to this poor family. What do you think of this case? Do you think it was a hate crime? Maybe Gallant hated himself for having intimate feelings and participating in gay acts with other men. Sometimes they do that, and then they take that rage out that they have for themselves on other people. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow my profile, like and share this episode. It helps more people discover these stories and keeps the conversation going. Thanks for listening to Crime Time 911. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always trust your gut.